All right, well, I've been out of the country for a couple weeks. I'm back, and while I was gone, the Willys had a chance to dry. The paint, that is, should be nice and cured and really hard. You know, rattle cans get a bad rap, but most of the problem with rattle cans is just the dry time. You gotta let them dry way longer than you expect. And this is feeling pretty good. Of course, it'll still probably harden up for months and months, but I'm really loving this. Nice to come back to a nice, a project that's in a good stopping point, and I can pick it back up nice and clean, take it to the next step. Actually, the next step is finishing up the previous step. I just need to flip it upside down and paint some of the areas that I couldn't get before. I'm gonna do that next. While that's drying, I'm going to get back on the engine transmission, which I took apart so that I could replace the bolts on the back of the crankshaft. Well, I ran into a speed bump when I went to install this flywheel on this crankshaft, and that was when this threaded dowel pin actually stripped. And when I got everything taken off, this one was not far behind it. So you can see that basically these are tapered, and the taper is set when you crank them down. These are new dowel pins that were installed to replace, obviously, the ones that were stripped. I've also got new bolts here, and these are actually bolts that are made for this application. These are from Willys. And they are shouldered bolts, whereas the ones that were in here from the engine rebuilder were just grade 8 hardware store. They were good bolts, but they weren't for purpose, whereas these are shouldered bolts, which sit centered in the crank flange, and they're actually meant for this job. Unfortunately, it's a real pain to actually get these installed because obviously you can't reach behind there and push them through. So what you have to do, turn the engine upside down, remove the oil pan, then remove this main bearing block. And once you do that, you can rotate the crank around and put a bolt in from the other side. And that's what had to happen in this case. So a bit of a snag, but now I'm back to the point where I am installing things, hoping to at least mock up the clutch, flywheel, all that stuff to find out what parts I'm missing. But on the best case, maybe I have all the parts and I can actually put it together for good. So next thing to do is to clean off this surface and this surface to make sure that you're ready to mate. And then you also have to clock the crank to the right position. So let me show you how you do that. I'm sure there are lots of great videos that show you how to do this, but I'll give you my quick and dirty. So ultimately, you're trying to find the piston in cylinder number 1 at top dead center on the compression stroke. So the way that I do that is just put a socket on the crank, and here I'm using a old torque wrench that's been repurposed into a breaker bar. But I'll turn this clockwise with my left hand while I have my right finger in the spark plug hole here, and I'm waiting to feel pressure build up. You'll feel it against your finger really easily. That means that you're on the compression stroke and that piston is coming up. And so you'll keep on turning until that pressure basically goes to 0, but you might want to start back here and just watch where these dowel pins are once you feel the pressure, because you're ultimately going to end up with one of them at this horizontal position here. It's just a matter of which one. So you'll probably feel pressure and see a dowel pin like down here, and that means that you can keep on cranking it and just verify that as this comes up to the horizontal position, that's the same time that you feel, the pressure stop here. You'll literally be able to pull your finger away and hear like a pfft as the air comes out. It builds a good amount of air pressure in there. So that's the quick and dirty way to know that you've got piston number 1 top dead center on the compression stroke, and you're going to be able to see through this hole here. It's going to be, of course, installed here. You're going to be able to see through that hole these timing marks that are on the flywheel. So once you're in this position, you also want to make sure that you install the flywheel with these marks visible through that hole. That'll set you up for success when you go to time things later on. And here's what it looks like. Once you have the flywheel hung on the crankshaft, if you look through this sight hole, you should see those labeled tick marks there. So that'll tell you that you have the flywheel oriented correctly out of the 2 positions it can be on those 2 tapered dowel pins, you're in the right position. So I'm gonna go ahead and bolt the crankshaft, the flywheel, onto the crankshaft. And I'm sure you know how to get into arguments on the internet, but one thing you may not have known is controversial is the subject of lock washers, especially split washers gets people upset. But these are the lock washers that came in the kit from Willys, along with these nuts. So I'm gonna stick to the things that came in the kit. And I'm also going to use blue Loctite because I feel like it's 2025. And we have options now that they didn't have back in 1947. So that'll be a little extra insurance. Also, I already installed a new pilot bushing, and that's something you'll definitely want to do. It supports the input shaft, so it'll never be easier than right now, but make sure it fits on there first because oftentimes you have to ream them a little bit. So other than that, just the torque is what's important. 35 to 40 foot-pounds is what I'm reading mostly. I'm gonna stick to the 35 end because it will be lubricated with the Loctite. And also, just to be honest with you, because I already stripped these out, I don't wanna strip them again. It was a painful, annoying process, and I'm literally operating out of fear here. Flywheel's all bolted down, 35 foot-pounds all the way around, and blue Loctite. That's not going anywhere. So now I'm turning my attention to the pressure plate, and it shows up really good on camera actually. I noticed that there's some surface rust on here. So rather than just installing everything and counting on that wearing out on the clutch eventually, which it would, I'm gonna use something I just learned to use for rust removal, and that's this phosphoric acid mix. So I'm just gonna spray a little bit on here. And the nice thing is, this is a controlled area where I can let it work, rinse it off, and dry it. So I won't have any rust on there when I'm done versus doing the entire frame. It's a little tougher to get those things in order. So that will get rid of the surface rust, leave a nice, clean metal surface. And then I'll just have to manually or visually center up the clutch. I don't have the tool, but just wanted to talk about the clutch positioning. You can only go one way. It won't fit this way. There's a little hat and there's only clearance for it that way. And then obviously you just need to have it centered. So if you have the tool that goes into the pilot bushing and goes to these splines, great. Although I found sometimes those tools still let you have the clutch kind of off center. So I'm not convinced that they're the greatest thing in the world, but you can use that, or you can literally just center it by eyeball, and that's pretty easy to do. And I've been successful with that. So that's what I'll be doing next. Currently just babbling, waiting for the acid to eat up some of this rust. And I also might as well mention that I also got the bolt kit for the pressure plate to flywheel, also from Willys. I figured why not use their recommendation rather than just whatever bolts I had from the pile of Jeep parts that I'm working with. It's nice to start with fresh, new ones. So, all right, I'll bring you back after I got this all done. Well, unfortunately, I encountered another problem on the flywheel, and that's that this hole is almost completely stripped out. If you take one of these clutch pressure plate to flywheel bolts and you insert it into one of the good holes, you get about that far before you get some thread engagement. If you put it into this hole, it just drops in, and even then it gets kind of crunchy just to turn it at all. So we finally got a little bit, but you can see how little space is left on the bolt shank, and that's got to go through a lock nut as well as this clutch pressure plate flange. So by the time you get through those two, you don't have much space left here, maybe one or two threads of engagement. That's not gonna work. And so I thought maybe, all right, I'll just use one of these grade 8 hardware store bolts, and that will help because there's some unused thread in the depth of the flywheel here, but you're still installing into less threads than you would otherwise. So I'm not gonna go that route. Instead, I'm gonna bite the bullet and drill this out, insert a thread insert, and use some red Loctite on the insert, blue Loctite on the clutch pressure plate to flywheel bolt, and that should be a permanent repair. Well, thanks for time traveling with me. I just finished drilling through the stripped out threads using this standard drill bit. This is cast steel, which is about the easiest thing you'll ever drill through. So you don't need anything special. You just need to keep the bit perpendicular to the flywheel surface, and it'll actually almost align itself just because there's already a hole there. So this is a 21/64 bit, which is the size specified by this tap that I almost certainly won't be able to get focus on, but you have to trust me, it says 21/64, and that's part of the Helicoil kit. I chose Helicoil because it's the one I could get easily, quickly, cheaply, locally. There are other types of inserts, such as a time cert, that is arguably better in certain situations. I don't think this really is one. This is a through hole, so it's easy drilling and also easy to clean by blowing brake parts cleaner through it. So I'll get really good bond strength with the red Loctite I'm gonna use. And it really only needs to clamp down or overcome the clutch spring pressure along with the other 5 bolts. So it's not really a highly stressed joint. The only real problem that people have with helicoils is is that they can back out in certain situations, but in terms of the actual pull strength, in most tests, the head of the bolt breaks off before the heel coil has any trouble. So that is that. I'm going to go ahead and insert it now. Of course, it comes with an insertion tool, and you can watch other videos. There's plenty of them on installing a heel coil if you want any more details. I'll be back after it's installed. Okay, my helicoil is inserted. I still need to break off the tang on the end, but you can see that the helicoil sits a bit down below the surface of the flywheel. That's intentional to match the other existing holes on the flywheel, which have this bit of freebore before the first thread picks up. So I just took one of these bolts and found what that distance is before you grab the first thread, and then set the same distance on my helicoil when I was inserting it. So got to break off that tang and let the red Loctite cure completely, and I'll be ready to put this pressure plate on finally. Okay, I've got the pressure plate held on by just a few bolts, so I can still move the clutch around, and I'm just finding the center here. So this would be what those plastic clutch alignment tools do, but you can do it by eye as well. Just lining up those clutch splines relative to the brass pilot bushing in the back and trying to find center. So I think I've got it pretty good. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the more perfecter you get it, the easier the transmission input shaft will slide into there. Okay, going around and torquing the bolts down now. They need between 12 and 17 foot-pounds, which ends up being 144 to 204 inch-pounds if you've got an inch-pound torque wrench like I do. So I'm probably gonna aim for about 15 foot-pounds, which is 180 inch-pounds. Mainly important thing is just to go around and tighten them evenly to the same torque. Okay, engine transmission all bolted back together, and after you've done that 2 or 3 times, that's when naturally you'll learn about something else you could have done while you had them apart. In this case, the starter support bushing sits back in there, and I would like to put a new one on there, but fortunately, those designers way back in the 40s thought of this, and you can actually remove it while the two are together. I'm just using a socket on an extension to drive it out the back here. So let's see if I can do this with a copper bar on camera. Cool. So now I can get a new copper bushing inserted on this end while I can test fit it on my starter shaft first to make sure we have a good fit, and I can lube it up really well, and I can install it from this end. Phew, I really didn't want to take this apart again. Oops, mistakes were made. I have to fess up, I actually only blew out the back of the bushing. I hadn't actually removed it. I had a 3/8 socket, which accomplished that. I actually needed to use a 7/16 socket to get the real bushing out as such. So yeah, the 3/8 is basically what fit inside the bushing, but I needed to push out the bushing itself, obviously. So now here's what it looks like with the real bushing pushed out, not just the end cap. Definitely wasn't a waste of time. Here's what the bushing looks like. It's worn through all the way on one side, which makes sense. The starter is turning the flywheel teeth, and those teeth are going to push back in the same direction all the time, and that's where the shaft is going to ride on the bushing and wear it out. So that would have been floppy and unsupportive if I hadn't changed it out. I'll go get a new one. It's easy enough to push in from this side, at least I believe so. I'll have to check on that. Here's the starter. It's an old one, PS79A44. It seems to be free and in good shape. I do need to figure out how to lubricate it up, and I might test it on the bench. Then again, I might not. I might just throw it on the Jeep and see what it does. And my starter is missing the band that goes around here and protects the brushes and keeps dirt out of the contacts in there. That band is going to clamp around and then go to a bracket which attaches to the engine block and supports the back of the starter. So I got to find one of those, as well as the bushing, as well as take this apart and figure out where it needs to be lubed and do that lubrication. But that can be another day. For now, a starter is up out of the parts bin and onto an assembly, which is nice. I'll just label it so that I don't forget. All right, the chassis is back inside after having been outside and flipped upside down so that I could paint underneath in the areas I couldn't get to before. And now it's a game of touch-up. Each time I flip it, move it, I create new places that I'll have to touch up. But that's okay. I keep reminding myself this Willys is not going to Pebble Beach. And if I think about the order of operations, well, then I end up with places that are easy to touch up, really accessible. So that shouldn't be a problem, and it's up on jack stands, which is really nice, up high, so I don't have to lean over to work on it, and I can also get underneath it really easily. That's gonna be helpful for brake lines and putting in, of course, the whole drivetrain and many other things that I can do while I'm working on the wheels separately. But I do want to get it back on its wheels sooner than later so that it's mobile and keeps the project moving along. I have this theory that once projects go up on jack stands, that's the danger zone. That's when years start going by, or at least your progress can stall out. So I'm going to try to get it back on its wheels and mobile again as soon as possible, even if I have to take them off again. Try to avoid that pitfall where progress slows down. And speaking of wheels, that'll be the subject of the next video. So until then, leave any questions or suggestions in the comments below. Hit the like button if you found this enjoyable, and thanks a lot for watching.